Welcome to Debunque, a podcast dedicated to debunking stereotypes and combating hate speech against the LGBTQ plus community in Uganda. For our fifth episode, we're going to hear more of our interview with LGBTQ plus and human rights activist Peter Tatchell. If you've missed the first part of this interview, check out our episode 4, released September 2024.
So, Peter, you're switching now to the online world. What advice do you have for human rights defenders to push back on rising hate on social media?
Well, of course, social media is a great boon. When I was growing up, there was no social media, no mobile phones, no fax machines, no home printers. It was a primitive world, but we got by nevertheless. But now we have social media. It is both a boon, a plus, a great weapon we can use, but of course it's also has a downside and can be used against us. So I think, yes, amplifying LGBT plus issues on social media is very important. And I know from my own experience that it does have an impact. So I was doing some campaigns around Iran some years ago, which led to a whole group of individual Iranians in different cities and even small towns, and even in one case, a tiny rural village, connecting to me and through me connecting with each other. So that's really can be really effective. Through social media, I've recently helped get a young gay man out of Afghanistan. He had been captured, tortured, and gang raped by the Taliban, but he managed to escape. And then they were after him still. But working with others, I managed to help get him out of Afghanistan to a place of safety in a neighboring country. So he's not out of the woods yet, but he's now in a place of relative safety. And he contacted me just by Googling gay activists and campaigners, and my name came up. This was probably, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And there's an example of how social media can be a way in which individuals can be helped. Often individuals in very remote, isolated regions, often individuals under great personal threat. There have been other examples in Pakistan where I've been able to put people in touch with underground groups in that country to get out of their local village or small town to a larger city where there is a support network. So that's the way I try to operate, to try and give people the tools and the ability to alter their situation for the better.
So in countries where homosexuality is criminalized, is social media still a tool that can and should be harnessed for advocacy and awareness?
Well, obviously, where homosexuality is still illegal and where there is quasi-dictatorship, like in Uganda, social media is the safest forum. People have the ability to use false names, to use pseudonyms, to protect their identities. And they can speak out and conscientize people around them about LGBT plus issues, about the case for decriminalization, about the case for protection against hate crimes, about the case for legislation to outlaw discrimination in housing, employment, the provision of goods and services, and so on. So social media is a very, very good tool. It's not perfect. And I think at the end of the day, certainly more is needed, but more is not always possible. In situations of dictatorship, people don't have the other options. So in those circumstances, social media is the best and most effective tool. In the West here, a lot of people increasingly rely on social media, and I think it can be valuable. But I don't think it's enough in the West because, when you sign an online petition or, send a message out on social media, it's a very private act. No one, the wider public don't know you're doing this. It's only the people you reach in your small circle. So I always say in Western countries, yes, use social media, but also use more traditional methods like protest marches, um, you know, lobbying and petitions directly to members of parliament, to police chiefs, to doctors and medical officials, and so on. We need a whole range of different tools, a whole range of different methods. And as I said, in your situation in Uganda, most of those methods are not available because the risks are too great. And I understand and accept that, but I think it's great that many of you are using social media to push forward.
So, Peter, what impact do social media threats have on mental health and well-being within the LGBTQ community?
Well, we don't know much in terms of developing countries like Uganda because there hasn't been the research. But we definitely know that in Western countries, the research has been done and that social media can often have a very negative, corrosive effect on people's mental and physical health and well-being. The trolls targeting us, the online harassment, the abuse and threats, that is very, very mentally and emotionally damaging. And it can lead long term to actual physical ill health as well. So I think everybody needs to protect themselves. So, if you're being trolled or abused, block those people or at least mute them. If you're really feeling under stress, don't look at your social media. Post it, but don't look at it. And that's what I do because I get thousands and thousands of hate messages, threats, and so on my social media. Thousands and thousands. It comes and goes. I mean, there's periods when it's quiet and others when it runs into the thousands in 2 or 3 days. But the only way to cope with that is just not by looking at it, just ignoring it. You have to just look away for your own mental well-being. You have to look away. You have to say, I've posted what I want to say. The toxic responses are just too toxic to deal with. I need to leave it. I need to, step away. Don't look at those responses. If you're finding it's getting you down, just don't look. I know it's tempting to look, but don't look. And for the most part, I do not look at responses to my posts, particularly on Twitter. Partly because I'm so overwhelmed with so many tasks and jobs and so much pressure, but also partly because I know how mentally and emotionally damaging it is. And I'm quite a strong person. And if I feel that way, then I guess most people in a similar situation would feel that way as well. You just have to say no. And if it's really bad, you have to come off social media. You just have to delete your perhaps not delete your account, but just not post on your account for a while until you feel in a better, stronger, safer place.
If someone is actually an activist and they are willing to do anything for the community, is it really right to hide regardless for your mental health? Because I think as an activist, you come out to fight for other people's mental health.
Well, I think it's best, if possible, that people stay in and fight. If we run away every time we're under attack, we'll never change things. So I think it is best if we do stay and fight. But I'm mindful that for some people, they don't have the mental and physical strength. And that's not a failing or a weakness. The pressure and the abuse, the threats, the violent threats and others on social media are so extreme that, I don't blame people from stepping away. And sometimes perhaps you have to step away in order to fight another day. I know people who have been completely crushed by attacks on social media. They used to be great activists on social media, but the attacks were so severe, so sustained, did so much emotional and mental harm that they had a nervous breakdown. And now they don't do any activism. So it's better if you're really under pressure and you feel you can't cope, if you feel your limit is being stretched, it's better if you step away for a while than you keep yourself on the firing line and risk a mental breakdown, because then you won't be able to do anything.
Thank you, Peter. As LGBTQ plus Ugandans, we have a right to live with dignity and we deserve human rights. How do we reclaim pride? How can grassroots movements leverage social media to amplify their messages without fear of being targets?
Well, of course, sadly, it's inevitable that if you go on social media in Uganda and advocate for LGBT plus rights, it is almost inevitable that you will come under attack, that you'll be harassed, threatened, subjected to trolling, and it will often make your life hell. So that is a reality. That's a fact of life. It's wrong, but it is a reality. So this goes back to the same point as I've said before. You each must decide how much you can take, how much harassment and victimization you can bear. But at the end of the day, the important thing is we need you to survive. We need you for the long struggle. We need you to have longevity of activism, not just a short, wonderful starburst, if I can use that analogy. Starbursts are fine. If someone does something amazing and spectacular and makes an impact for a short time, I'm not criticizing that. But what I'm saying is, to be a real change maker, you need to be in for the long haul. And therefore, you need to protect your mental and physical health. You need to safeguard that so that you can continue to do activism in the long term. Now, I'm saying this even though I'm the worst example myself of someone not doing it. Well, I do it a bit, but I've been very close to a mental breakdown in recent months because of the sustained threats to kill me, rape me, murder my partner, and burn down my house. That's been very, very challenging, very stressful. Part of me thinks I should just step away, but then again, I just feel I have to keep battling on. But it's pushed me to the edge, and I'm not ashamed to admit that. I get something like 2,000 messages and requests every single day, and even on the weekend, it only goes down to about 1,200. A lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them are serious, grave threats. And I know for the most part, people are just bluffing and trying to scare me. But it does worry me, and I'm sure it must worry you, because you're even in a more dangerous and vulnerable situation. It must worry you that one day one of these extremists will actually try and do something, and that could be your death. So, we do all have to be really careful. We have to protect ourselves.
So, Peter, what strategies do you suggest would work best for the LGBTQ plus people still struggling under criminalization and other anti-LGBTQ laws?
Well, of course, it's not for me to say. I can give you my experience, my advice, but at the end of the day, you must decide because you know best. So in Uganda, Ugandan activists know best, not me. I'm here as an ally, a supporter, someone showing solidarity, but you have to chart your own course. You have to make an assessment about what is possible and what is achievable. And so that means not following a Western example. Don't just borrow from the West. You can look and learn from the West where it's appropriate, but in many cases, Western strategies are not appropriate for a quasi-dictatorship like Uganda. One thing I've said that is really perhaps quite useful is to publicize the history of same-sex relations in your country among indigenous Black Ugandans prior to the advent of colonization. So as you know, the Museveni regime and its supporters claim that homosexuality is an import from the West, that it's un-African, that it's not part of African traditional culture. Well, of course, that is completely untrue. The anthropological studies from the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries show that homosexuality has existed in Uganda since the first anthropologists went there. It's very clear that homosexuality is a part of traditional African culture. I think that it's very important and useful to publicize that, to do the research, to find examples of homosexuality existing in pre-colonial Uganda. That is, Uganda before the colonizers, the British, arrived. And there is evidence out there. There isn't a huge amount of it, but it is there. And I would say that's a very good tactic to help debunk the idea that homosexuality is a Western import, that it's not genuinely and truthfully, authentically African. So use that as a tool to try and debunk the propaganda of those who want to deny the reality of African homosexuality.
I appreciate actually the work the international community has done for the LGBTQ community in Uganda. But personally, I think there has been no action taken for the young activists, mostly those applying for visas to go to come out to these countries. Okay, for example, the UK, USA, and Canada. Yet they have an intention of actually coming to those countries to spread or say something about what is happening back here at home. So what do you think can be done to solve this? Like, do they just need to organize campaigns for this also, or maybe they need to sign petitions, something like that? Like, what can they really do? Because these people are actually fighting a lot back here.
Well, it's LGBT plus people in Uganda who must give the lead and take the decisions. And it's people like me in the West who must support them. So my role is as an ally in solidarity. It's up to the LGBT plus Ugandans to decide what needs to be done. Now, I would be very happy to come out to Uganda and challenge President Museveni. I'd turn up at the presidential palace and demand to see him and, tell him that he was wrong, that he was ignorant and ill-informed about LGBT plus issues. But that would not be the right approach, because that would just play into the hands of those who say that homosexuality is a Western import. So the leadership and the public face of LGBT plus rights in Uganda must be by Ugandans, not by people like me from the West. We're supporters and allies, but the lead must be given by LGBT plus Ugandans. Then it better shows that Ugandan LGBTs are leading the fight, that it's an LGBT African fight, not a Western fight. When it comes to actually fundamentally changing things, change has to come within. It has to be an authentic Ugandan change, and any attempt to impose or impose something outside will not work. It will just play into the hands of Ugandan homophobes who say that this is just a Western agenda. So we have to be really, really careful. And it's very frustrating because, there are lots of things I personally would be willing to do, but I know it would backfire. I had an idea many years ago with Frank Mugisha from SMUG about doing a protest on the steps of the Ugandan Parliament House. And, I said at the end of the day, that's not going to be a good look. For me to be there as a white Western person, that's not a good look. That's not going to help. It needs African faces, African voices, African people. And of course, not just LGBT plus Africans. We also need straight African allies as well. That's also very important. So I pay tribute to the work of Bishop Christopher Senyonjo, a former bishop of the Church of Uganda, who was expelled and stripped of his pension because he supported LGBT plus rights. He was a great spokesperson. He's now very, very old. I think he's close to his 90s. And I don't think his health has been that good. But he was a fantastic, this is like two decades ago, he was a fantastic spokesperson for LGBT plus rights as a straight Christian minister, a bishop no less. We need more people like that. And there are lots of people in Uganda who are allies. And in fact, I would say that's one of the tasks for LGBT plus people, is to identify those allies and to get them to speak out. Because as you've said, it's not safe for LGBT plus people to speak out, but allies can speak out. Allies may still be at some risk, but not at the same risk. And there are some great human rights defenders in Uganda, some great people in Uganda who I think, if asked, probably would sign an open letter or agree to be part of a delegation to meet members of parliament. I don't know, I'm just speculating, but there are good people in Uganda, good straight people in Uganda who support our cause. It isn't all bleak. It's pretty bleak, it's very bleak, but it isn't all bleak.
I can pose this as the last question to you. What steps can international communities take to address online threats and protect LGBTQ plus individuals from the hate that is growing across Africa?
Sadly, the reality is there's not a lot that international LGBT plus or other organizations can do. We do not want to replicate colonialism. We don't want neo-colonialism. We don't want homo-nationalism. We don't want, a situation where the West is dictating. So we have to be really, really, really careful. This struggle is by and for LGBT plus people in Uganda. It's their struggle. It's their fight. We can support them, but it is sadly very limited in terms of what we can do. As I said, we can amplify your voices. We can report on your struggles, your campaigns, your persecution, your defiance, your brilliant attempts to use social media to promote LGBT plus rights. But beyond that, it's very, very limited. Now, there have been in the past some schemes whereby Western countries have provided scholarships for LGBT plus campaigners in repressive countries to come to Britain, or I think Canada, and receive training, media training, campaign training, organizational training, fundraising training. So that's one thing that Western countries could be doing. They could also find ways to provide discrete funding for LGBT plus organizations. The other thing, of course, is that ultimately Western countries should be sanctioning Ugandan leaders, indeed, not just the top leadership, but every single Ugandan MP who voted for the Anti-Homosexuality Act should be put on a sanctions list, to ban them from travel to Western countries, to freeze their bank accounts, to, if they have children at school in Western countries, to expel those children from the country. Those kind of sanctions, we don't want to do them, but that's about all that Western countries have got left to do. And I think it's quite difficult and morally ambiguous, but at the end of the day, the repression is so great, Western countries have to do something. And if they're colluding with repressive regimes by providing homes, allowing people from dictatorships to buy homes and live in Britain part of the year, to school their children here, that's rewarding dictatorship. And there's no place for that. There's no place for that. So Western governments could introduce sanctions on Ugandan leaders and all the MPs who voted for the Anti-Homosexuality Act, and indeed also the religious leaders who sanctioned and supported the Homosexuality Act. As I said, Western companies or international bodies like the World Bank They could introduce a sanctions regime to switch aid from the government of Uganda to NGOs that don't discriminate. They could also, if they have Ugandan citizens on their board, they could remove them. They could refuse investment in Uganda. So lots of Western countries invest in Uganda. They could, in response to the Anti-Homosexuality Act, decide that that investment will be curtailed. But I would add this caution. We must not see everything just in terms of LGBT plus rights. LGBT plus people are not the only Ugandans who are suffering. There is widespread systematic human rights abuses across the board for many, many Ugandan citizens. And it's very important we don't become narrowly LGBT plus focused and forget that there are other victims of the Museveni regime. You know, the struggle for LGBT plus rights cannot be separated from the wider struggle for democracy and human rights in Uganda. These are two aspects of the same basic fundamental struggle. And it's really important that LGBT support the democratic opposition in Uganda, that you support the civil and human rights organizations that are championing women's rights, trade union rights, the rights of students and journalists and human rights defenders, the rights of ethnic and tribal minorities in Uganda. It's really important we do not see ourselves simply in terms of LGBT, because we're not. You know, we're LGBT and we're many other things. And we are part of a society where lots of people suffer oppression. So again, this is something you must decide. But I think in terms of building support for LGBT plus rights, it's really important that LGBT plus people support the struggles of other Ugandans. If we support other people's struggle, they're more likely to support our struggle. It's all about unity and solidarity. Let other people know that you are on their side, and they're going to be more likely to support you and be on your side. But again, it's up to you to decide because you know best. This is just my experience and suggestion.
Thank you, Peter. I want to request that at least you send a simple small message to the LGBTQ plus individuals and activists in Uganda here.
Well, yes, I mean, you know, I'm your supporter and friend and ally, but it's your fight. The one thing I would just add is that the number one obstacle to LGBT plus rights in Uganda is the Museveni dictatorship. It is the main roadblock to LGBT plus rights. There will never be any progress on LGBT plus rights so long as Museveni and his party are in power. So that is why, as a Western person, I support Bobi Wine and his party, even though they are not perfect. They're not perfect by a long shot. Their MPs voted for the Anti-Homosexuality Act, and that's shameful. But they are operating in a country where homophobia is so toxic, so pervasive, so widespread, it's obvious they cannot openly come out in support of LGBT plus rights. So Bobi Wine has said he supports human rights for everyone. And by implication, that includes LGBT plus people. That is not perfect. It's not ideal, but it's the best we can expect. And I don't think we should hold Bobi Wine and his party to the same standards as Western political parties, because they're operating in a situation of dictatorship. They're operating in a culture where homophobia is so strong, so powerful, it would be electoral suicide for Bobi Wine and his party to come out and openly support LGBT rights. They would lose nearly all their public support. And if they lose their public support, Museveni will remain in power, and after he's gone, his party will remain in power forever. I ask you, is that what we want? You have to sometimes go stage by stage, step by step. You go little steps, little steps, little steps. You can't make big steps in a dictatorship. You sometimes have to go little by little. And The whole issue for me is unity and solidarity. Stand together, support each other. And then if you support others, they're more likely to support you.
Thank you, Peter, for that. We've actually learned a lot, and we're still learning a lot from you and every established LGBTQ plus activist out there. And we actually thank them for the good work, for advocating for the human rights of the LGBTQ plus community. You've been listening to the Debunque podcast, and I'm Alexa, your host. Keep listening in, and thank you, Peter.
Thank you so much, and good luck with your struggle. I am full of admiration. You are inspiring. I know you are risking your freedom and potentially your life, and that is incredibly admirable. I'm so, so proud to know you all.
This is it for our interview with the great LGBTQ plus and human rights activist, Peter Tatchell. Thank you again, Peter, for taking the time to talk to the Debunque podcast. You can hear the first part of Peter's interview on our 4th episode released September 2024. Debunque releases episodes monthly, and our next episode will be published on November 14th, 2024. Until then, consider donating to Debunque. Your contributions help us cover guest travel costs, production costs, and keep this important show running. Visit the Debunque page on royalraiseinitiative.org to donate.